The trickster is a character archetype that exists across all cultures, beliefs, and mythologies. We have Loki in Norse mythology, Wukong in Chinese mythology, and of course, Anansi in West African mythology. Anansi is a popular figure within Akan folklore, known to be clever and cunning, using his intellect to get what he wants. The Akan people are an ethno-linguistic group that live primarily in parts of Ghana, Togo, and Ivory Coast. Although Anansi is typically depicted as a spider, sometimes he's shown as a spider with human features, like a human face, and in some stories he's able to change his form into whatever he wants. The name Anansi is derived from the Akan word Anansi, which means spider. The stories of Anansi have spread across the diaspora, with his stories being told across North America, Africa, and the Caribbean. In some iterations within North America, Anansi is referred to as Auntie Nancy. Each culture has its different iteration and version of Anansi, so we will try to incorporate different versions of him within this video. In some stories, Anansi is an intermediary between the sky god, Nyame, and humanity, and in other stories he's just a trickster. But mostly, he's both of these things all at once, and so he walks the line of a morally grey character who uses others to his advantage, whilst also sometimes helping people. I remember being told Anansi's stories as a child and thinking how I wanted to be as smart as he was. And in this video, I'll be telling you some of the popular stories that will hopefully make you feel the same way. I'll cover things like how he became a spider, as well as how he became the owner of all stories. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please like and subscribe to support this channel. Let's get into the video. According to the Dagomba people, who reside in modern-day Ghana and Togo, Anansi was not always a spider. He started off as a wealthy farmer who was just an ordinary human being. In the country where he lived, the king possessed a magnificent ram, and the ram was the most precious thing that the king owned. It was so precious that the king gave an order to all the people of his country. He told them to allow the ram to roam anywhere it wants and to eat anything it wanted, even if it meant that they would have to starve. It was well known by the people that hurting or injuring the ram in any way could lead to death. Most citizens didn't really have a problem with this. However, Anansi, the farmer, was different. Anansi took great pride in the crops that he grew, and people who knew Anansi believed he would react horribly to the presence of the king's ram on his farm, and so they hoped and prayed that the event would never happen. But one day, all their fears came to pass. At the peak of his crop's growth, he noticed an animal trampling on and eating the corn he had planted. Intending to scare the ram away without harming it, Anansi threw a pebble, but there was one small problem. The pebble hit the ram directly, killing it on impact. So not only did he harm the ram, he killed it, and so he knew he was in a whole new level of trouble with the king. But of course, even as a normal person, Anansi was still a trickster. Whilst thinking about how to solve his problem, he was leaning on a shea butter tree, and suddenly one of the nuts in the tree fell on his head. He picked it up, tasted it, and realized how much he loved the taste. And from there he developed his big idea on how to avoid getting into trouble with the king. Carefully, he picked up the king's dead ram and hung it in the tree. Quickly, he went to retrieve his friend, who was called Konsumbuli. He was a spider. He told his friend he had found excellent tasting nuts in the tree and brought him back to the shea butter tree with him. Once they reached the tree, after giving his friend an initial taste, he told the friend he would need to shake the tree with a great amount of force to get its contents to the ground. Suspecting nothing, the spider did as Anansi instructed, but he didn't just get the treats. The ram, which Anansi had hidden there previously, fell down to the ground too. Anansi acted as if he was unaware, telling the spider that he'd need to report to the king that he had just killed the ram, shifting the blame from him to his friend entirely. Panicked, the spider took Anansi's advice, and he genuinely believed that he had just killed the ram. He quickly went on his way. But before going to the king, he went to his home to talk to his wife about what had happened. However, his wife, being quite clever, realized that Anansi was manipulating her husband, since it was obvious that rams don't just climb trees. So they devised a plan. They lied to Anansi that his friend, the spider, had reported to the king, who had given him pardon and allowed him to eat the ram meat. This enraged Anansi, and he shouted that it was unfair that they were given the meat, since he was the one that went through all the trouble of killing it, and so they got their confession. As soon as he confessed, they captured Anansi and took him to the king, and of course the king was extremely angry with Anansi. He kicked Anansi so hard that he broke into 1,000 pieces. Each piece of Anansi was a tiny spider, and it is believed that each of his parts are looking for one day when someone puts all the pieces back together. In this story, Anansi acts as an intermediary between Nyame and mankind. Nyame or Anyame translates to the one who sees and knows everything, making Nyame the supreme being for the Akan people. In other videos, I do cover more on Ashanti and Akan beliefs, so check them out if you want to learn more. Of course, as an intermediary for God, you would expect Anansi to get a high level of respect for human beings. But if you also know Anansi, you know he's going to abuse the power that he holds. In this story, Anansi asks God for a cob of corn and promises to repay it with 100 servants. First, he takes the corn to a village and tells the people that the corn is sacred. During the same night, Anansi feeds the corn to the chickens. The next morning, he accuses the villagers of stealing the corn, and they gave him a bushel of it to make up for the lost cob. Anansi then meets a man on the road and exchanges the corn for a chicken. He visits another village and tells the people that the chicken is sacred. That night, he kills the chicken. The next morning, the frightened villagers give him 10 sheep to replace it. Anansi later exchanges the sheep for a corpse, which he takes to the third village and tells the people that this is the sleeping son of God. When the villagers cannot wake the corpse the next morning, Anansi says that they have killed God's son. The terrified villagers offer him 100 of their finest young men to make amends. Anansi takes them to God and fulfills his part of the bargain. Before Anansi, Nyame was the owner of all stories known in the world. It was Anansi's greatest wish to have this position for himself. And so one day, Anansi went to Nyame and tried to persuade him to sell the stories. Nyame initially refused, saying that many wealthy people have tried to buy the stories from him, but the price is just too high. Anansi reassured Nyame that he could pay any price to become the owner of stories. So Nyame told him his requirements. First, he had to capture Onini, the old python. Then he had to search for Umoboro, the largest nest of hornets in the forest, and bring them to him. Finally, he had to catch out Osibo, the fastest of all leopards. And at face value, these seem like impossible tasks, but Anansi used his intellect and wit to overcome the challenges. He accepted the challenge and went about planning for the first, capturing the python. He first consulted his wife, who was called Aso. She was known to be extremely intelligent, and he asked her how he could trap the great python. Together they devised a plan, and Anansi went ahead to execute it. Anansi went to the forest where Onini lived, carrying a long stick and some string vines. He pretended to be arguing with himself, saying things like, "My wife says that Onini is shorter than a stick, but I say he is longer." Onini came out of his hiding place, curious, and asked Anansi what he was doing. Anansi explained that he was having a dispute with his wife about Onini's size, and they argued about who was longer, the stick or the python. Onini said there was no need to argue, and instead offered to compare his size to the stick Anansi carried, stretching himself next to it. As Onini was stretching, Anansi quickly tied his tail to the stick with the vines. Onini was caught off guard. He struggled to free himself, but Anansi had secured the knot extremely tightly. After presenting Onini the python to Nyame, Anansi moved on to plan the capture of Umoboro, the nest of hornets. He prepared a gourd, carefully hollowing out its interior so he could store things inside. Then he filled the gourd with water and set out towards Umoboro's nest. Arriving at the nest, Anansi began pouring water from the gourd over his head, mimicking the sound of rain. He then sprinkled the last of the water on the hornet's nest. After doing so, he told the hornets that heavy rains were coming. If they stayed in their current home, they would be swept away if they didn't find somewhere dry. He said his gourd would keep them safe from the coming rain, and they thanked him as they entered the gourd. And of course, all of this was a lie. Anansi quickly sealed the gourd as the hornets all entered and presented them to Nyame. The final task was capturing Osibo, the fastest leopard. This time, Anansi's wife suggested digging a pit trap, and Anansi set out to find the perfect spot for it. He dug a deep hole, camouflaging it with leaves and branches, making the pit invisible to the naked eye. As night fell, Osibo emerged from his lair, prowling the forest in search of prey, unaware of the trap waiting for him. Soon enough, he fell into the pit. Anansi slowly approached, feigning sympathy for the trapped leopard. Osibo was desperate to escape. He begged Anansi for help. Anansi, knowing Osibo's reputation as a cunning hunter, was wary of trusting the leopard. He had Osibo reassure him that he wouldn't eat him when he was out of the trap. As Osibo reassured him, Anansi agreed to help the leopard. So he tied the rope to the branches of a tall tree and lowered the other end into the pit. Anansi instructed Osibo to tie the rope to his tail. Next, Anansi cut the rope holding the tree, and Osibo was pulled out of the pit, hanging upside down. As Osibo struggled to free himself, Anansi seized the opportunity and plunged his knife into the leopard's chest, killing him instantly. With Osibo defeated, Anansi carried the leopard's body to the sky god. By bringing Osibo to Nyame, Anansi had completed all of the 3 tasks required by Nyame to become the owner of all stories, and he was granted Nyame's blessing. So now whenever a man wishes to tell a story for the entertainment of his people, he must first acknowledge that all tales belong to Anansi. I hope you all enjoyed learning about Anansi today. Feel free to let me know what your favourite story was, and please like, comment and subscribe to support the channel. See you all soon and keep learning.